On October 8, 2019, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments for one of the most important cases for the LGBT plus community.
The issues before the Supreme Court are whether Title VII protects transgender individuals against discrimination, whether in employment, whether discrimination against someone who's transgender is encompassed by the term sex discrimination. The Supreme Court case, Harris Funeral Homes v. Amy Stevens, was a case where an individual, Amy Stevens, worked at a funeral home, and she wrote a letter sharing with her coworkers and bosses that she was transgender, and she was terminated shortly thereafter. And I believe that her boss was very straightforward and verbal with her that the reason she was being terminated was because she was transgender.
Every court that's looked at the question of whether trans people are protected under that law has held that they are. And that's for good reason. If an employer is fine with you coming to work as Joe, but then has a problem with you coming to work as Jane, the only thing that's different, the only thing that's changed is the sex. So it's discrimination based on sex.
The case contrasts the slew of rights U.S. President Donald Trump has attempted to roll back since his announcement in August 2017 to ban people in the transgender community from serving in the military.
I lost my job. I lost my car. I became homeless to where I was basically living across the street after saving up for 2 months to live in an office, instead of, living on the streets anymore. And then as this president tried to get rid of the ethics office, go after people of, national origin. He came after the immigrants. He came after, people of color. He came after, sex, and he came after me, and I was like, oh my God, I was seeing this happen, of the workplace discrimination that was going on, and I was like, it's going to happen to me, but I don't want it to happen to the 10 to 15,000 people that are going to get hurt and maybe lose the same thing that I'm going through and may lose their pension.
More than 1 in 4 transgender people have lost a job due to bias, and more than 3/4 have experienced some form of workplace discrimination, according to the National Center for Transgender Equality.
If the Supreme Court does decide that this is something that definitely needs to be protected, it really honestly will be a game changer for our young people, because it would, one, it will hold employers more accountable in, how trans individuals are treated, when it comes to employment, when it comes to individuals not only just receiving jobs, but folks being able to keep jobs.
The Supreme Court case unfolded with the backdrop of attacks on the transgender community. According to the Human Rights Campaign, 22 transgender people have been killed in 2019, most of which were transgender women of color.
When you can't find employment because an employer discriminates against you, or you can't find housing, a lot of times you're forced into the margins in places where you're much more vulnerable to that kind of violence. So these are systemic issues, and that's why the issue of employment is so important, and that's why it's so important that people are able to find meaningful employment, that they can feed themselves and their families, and that's why it's so enraging to me personally to see people fight so hard to retain the right to discriminate against people because of who they are or who they love. It's my family. I happen to be a transgender person myself, so I'm personally affected, but I also see how this impacts my community